All right, let's talk about news. So, speaking of death row and executions, the state of Texas, not so good when it comes to just about everything. So, I want to read this story here. Melissa Lucio is scheduled to be executed for a crime that may not have even occurred. So there's a lot to take in here. This has been developing, over the course of more than a decade now. But of course, but her execution is scheduled to be very soon. And it's very clear, at least to me, upon looking into this story for a little bit, that there was no crime. So imagine, not only, well, I'll go into this. Let me frame this story here by reading this article a little bit. Melissa Lucio is scheduled to be executed next week for a crime she says she didn't commit. That would be this week. One that may not have even occurred. She was convicted 14 years ago of murdering her 2-year-old daughter, Maria, and a Texas jury sentenced her to death. The state says Lucio beat her daughter to death, but as new details have emerged about her case, a growing chorus of lawmakers, faith leaders, anti-domestic violence organizations, and celebrities have called for clemency. At least one juror from the trial says the jury was not given the full picture, and that if he had known more, he would have never voted for the death penalty. No court has ever considered the new evidence of Melissa Lucio's innocence, says Vanessa Potkin, director of special litigation at the Innocence Project and one of Lucio's attorneys. So first and foremost, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals could issue a stay so that the evidence of Melissa Lucio's innocence may be fully litigated in the court. And that's what we're hoping for. The case hinges on an interrogation of Lucio conducted 2 hours after Maria died, during which officers tried to get Lucio to confess to hurting her daughter. Now, again, this is where the story gets extremely bad. Lucio's attorneys say police had already decided on a narrative when they brought her in for interrogation. After 5 hours of questioning, 5 hours, so this is 7 hours after her child is dead, during which Lucio expressed her innocence more than 100 times, she eventually said, "I guess I did it," when asked if she was responsible for some of her daughter's injuries. The state called it an admission of guilt for Maria's death. So once again, this is in the same issue, in the same vein as torture, right? When you torture people, they will tell you anything you want to hear to get you to stop torturing them. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if, I'm going to admit to something that's going to result in me being tortured for 14 more years and eventually murdered by the government. That doesn't enter their brain. They are thinking, again, this is 6 to 7 hours after her daughter is killed in some accidental situation, right? She is mourning her dead child, and police were torturing her for 5 hours. Like, your kid is dead, you're mourning your dead child, and you have thug gangsters with guns pointing weapons at you saying, you did it for 5 hours, okay? Literally, I cannot imagine a single person that would be able to survive such a scenario without, again, just admitting that you did it to get the torture and pain to stop. But again, there's more details about Lucio's upbringing that makes this even more of a sad story, so I want to read this part. Lucio, 53, is a Mexican-American woman who has struggled against poverty and abuse since childhood. She is the mother of 14 children, including Maria. According to court documents submitted by Lucio's attorneys, she was sexually abused by her mother's boyfriend starting at the age of 6. Abuse that lasted for 2 years. She married at age 16, according to the Innocence Project. It was an abusive marriage. Her first husband, the group says, was a violent alcoholic who left her after she gave birth to their 5 children. So, she has a history of abuse. This person clearly, right, has PTSD, right? And so when you're abused almost all the time by almost everyone in your life for almost your entire life, and then your kid dies, and then thug gangsters point guns at you and torture you for 5 hours. Once again, this is a trauma response. She just said anything that she could to get the pain to stop, right? It's that simple. Her next partner continued the cycle of violence. This is a quote, punching her in public and beating her at home. By the time she gave birth to her 12th child, Melissa had experienced homelessness, drug addiction, and severe mental illness, according to the amicus brief filed by former prosecutors, anti-violence organizations, and others on Lucio's behalf. Lucio was pregnant with twin boys at the time of Maria's death, and when she was interrogated, she gave birth to the twins while in jail and was forced to give them up for adoption. She should have never been in jail. There's I don't know. Like, this is like, again, like, regardless of what you think, like, let's imagine a world where Melissa Lucio is, like, she threw her kid down the stairs on purpose or whatever, this fantasy realm, right? That doesn't make torture acceptable. We have actually an amendment that prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, right? So that doesn't make torture okay. All of a sudden, just because someone throws, or you think, especially in this instance, right? But let's assume that she did, that she's on camera. It does not make torture acceptable, right? It does not make, forcing, pregnancies on her, and forcing her to give up her children with no other option, right? She can't organize, with any other family members, her current family at all, right? It doesn't make any of this acceptable, right? Torture is not an acceptable form of punishment, in my opinion. But then when you add on top of that she didn't do this, and there was no crime, right? And she was just tortured for 5 hours, right? And because of her response, being tortured for 5 hours, she then continued to be tortured for 14 more years and is now going to be murdered by the government. I don't know, like, there is no other way around it. Anyone and everyone involved in this whole step, the police who tortured her, right? All the prosecutors who tortured her, the governors throughout their, all 14 years of governors who did not, issue her a pardon or clemency of any kind, though they all are participatory in torture. Every, juror, again, you should never vote for the death penalty. I'm not, exactly sure why they decided to vote for the death penalty. I'm not exactly sure if it was like death penalty or innocent. I don't know that detail, level of minutia, but just the idea that you should never vote for that, that's torture. Every level of this, right? And especially when you factor in that she did not do anything at all, right? There was no crime. When you factor that part in, what the fuck? Right? And then factor in how much money was spent on torturing Melissa Lucio for 14 years. How much tax dollar money was wasted on torture? I would assume probably hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars over the course of 14 years of torture. When you are torturing someone for 14 years, running them through like bizarre science experiments, locking them into cages, throwing them into other rooms and cages, solitary confinement, threatening them with murder on a daily basis, that is a lot of money spent on maintaining this torture regime. Why do people think she's innocent? At Lucio's trial, expert witnesses for the defense were not allowed to testify as to why she might have given a false confession. Among the experts her attorneys sought to put up on the stand was a psychologist who planned to testify that Lucio's history as a survivor of domestic and sexual abuse helped explain why she told interrogators what they wanted to hear after 5 hours. Again, I need to remind you, after 5 hours of torture, even if it wasn't true. But the trial judge ruled the testimony irrelevant, according to court documents. This is a whole system. That judge... Now again, if anybody, let's grant that torture is acceptable, because clearly we live in a society that has decided torture is acceptable. Me personally, I don't believe in torture, right? But let's pretend, let's go in a world where torture exists. Who is more deserving of being tortured? Someone who had their child die in front of them, right? Or a judge who deems that, psychological witnesses, people describing her history and pain and suffering, is irrelevant and sentenced her to death. Who deserves torture more? Someone who did nothing wrong and lost a child due to a random unfortunate accident? or the judge who literally sentenced her to murder, to death. He pulled the trigger and shot her in the head, metaphorically speaking. If anyone out of all of these characters deserves to be tortured, I'm asking you, which one do you really think deserves to be tortured? And this is why, right, again, this is why I don't support torture, because it turns into an endless cycle, right, of revenge, 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 and then people need revenge for their revenge, and then people need revenge for the revenge of the other person who got revenge, right? It turns into an endless cycle. My opinion, we should abolish torture. We should abolish, death penalty. We should abolish all forms of torture. That's my opinion, right? But if anyone deserves to be tortured, it's this judge. Instead, the judge has lived a lavish lifestyle of success. They're rich. Their family is bought and paid for. They have extreme political power. All they have to do is murder a couple people. What is the difference between that and mobsters or gangsters shooting people in the streets over drugs or whatever? Answer me this question. What is the genuine difference between the justice system, so-called in this country, and street gangs? Does anyone know what the actual difference is? The only difference is one of them has a piece of paper that has a signature on it that the rest of people just pretend means anything at all. Oh, you get that little signature by some random person, and then they put it in a book somewhere, and now you're allowed to shoot and kill people. Now you're allowed to murder people with weird cocktails of drugs. You're allowed to set people on fire. You're allowed to shoot them in the head. You're allowed to lock them in steel cages because someone signed a piece of paper? What? That all of a sudden makes torture okay? Potkin says it's now recognized that having a trauma history, such as Melissa had, being a survivor of sexual abuse and domestic abuse, is a risk factor and vulnerability during custodial interrogation for a false confession. False confessions are more common than you might think. More than a quarter of people exonerated by the Innocence Project in recent decades had confessed to the crime they allegedly committed. Again, this has been documented in things like Guantanamo Bay, where they illegally rounded people up, in some cases American citizens, and tortured them just because some dude said, yo, I know a guy, this guy totally has like a nuke or something, you want to go check this guy out? And then they find out that, like, you know, that guy, like, put him in a locker in high school or something, had nothing to do with anything, but that guy was tortured for fucking years in Guantanamo, right? And then they said, yeah, I did have a nuke. It's over there. And then they found no nuke. And then they continued to torture him even more. Because obviously they went and looked for all the nuclear weapons of mass destruction, didn't find any. And they assumed, instead of lying about having the nukes, he must have lied about the location. And so let's torture him some more. Right? Again, this is every single example of torture results in false confessions. If you point a gun at someone's face and threaten to kill them and say, I'm going to murder you and your whole family and I'm going to destroy your life if you don't give me what I want, you're going to give them what they want. It's like if someone mugs you, points a gun at you and says, give me your wallet. Do you want to give them your wallet? Should you give them your wallet? No. But will you, to avoid being murdered? Absolutely. It's that simple. But again, let's assume, even if Melissa Lucio escapes execution, which does not look to be happening, given the fact that the crazy governor of Texas has no interest in doing anything like that. Right, let's assume that she would be exonerated. Is the judge going to be held accountable for torturing her for 14 years? Are those cops going to be held accountable for torturing her for 5 hours that led to 14 years of torture? No. So let's assume, right, she is exonerated. Is our system even capable of holding anyone accountable for 14 years of torture? The most likely scenario, if she were exonerated, she'd be given like some cash settlement of some kind that equates to like less than minimum wage for working like half a job, part-time job for like fucking 5 years or something, right? That's usually what ends up happening, right? Are the cops who tortured her and threatened her with murder and torture and throwing in a steel cage for, like, are they going to be held accountable? No. Are any of the prosecutors going to be held accountable? No. Is anyone on the jury going to be held accountable? No. Is the judge going to be held accountable? No. Are the prison guards going to be held accountable? No. Is anyone else throughout any other part of the system, or any of the former governors going to be held accountable? Those that, were over the course of the last 14 years. Is anyone going to be held? No, of course not. Why? Because our system is not set up for that. The best case scenario is that the state says, whoops, here's $20, our bad. That's the best case scenario. And that's fucked up. Anyway, I don't know what to tell you. You can read this if you'd like. It's not looking good for Melissa Lucio. And this is just another example that fascists have control of the world. The government, right, of the United States is a fascist government. They will murder you. They will torture you, even though the Constitution says no. The Constitution says you are protected from cruel and unusual forms of punishment. I would say it's pretty cruel to throw someone in a steel cage for 14 years because their kid fell down the stairs and died while they were sleeping or something. Now, again, right, yes, should we have a broader conversation about child safety? Absolutely, right? But to throw all of the blame squarely on her, what about her abusive partner? What about all these other people that could have been involved in that or whatever, right? So, and also, again, why does everyone need to be, why does some random minority need to be held accountable for a random accident anyway? How come if there's an accident, we need to go and like fucking harass people and torture them for 14 years because of an accident? Now, if you want to say that people should be held accountable in some way because of an accident, okay. Death penalty? I don't think so. And especially, as it seems here, the accident didn't really have much to do with her. But again, our government is garbage. It's disgusting. Every step of the way. Every step. The government, those that pass laws, those that do the law, like enforcement, the cops, right? Those that read the laws and like decide and dictate all the things, the judges, whatever. Every form, every step of the way, corrupt fascists. The cops are corrupt fascists. The judges are corrupt fascists. The lawmakers are corrupt fascists. Every step of the way. They have designed a society that the goal is control and torture. They do it for fun. That's it. There's no other reason to torture people like this other than fun. It gets them hard. They, after torturing her, when they got that confession, they probably went into the back room and jerked each other off, the cops, I'm saying. Why? Because they get off on it. This is what they love to do. And instead of just like, jerking off at home, like watching Pornhub or something, they decide to get their rocks off by ending people's lives, torturing them for decades. That's what gets them off. I couldn't possibly explain why another human would want to do that. But they do. That's the world we live in. So I don't know what to tell you. Anyway.